Folks, Dr. Mike Israel here for Renaissance Periodization, and today I want to switch gears and talk about eternal salvation. What's going to happen to your soul when you die? Or we could talk about rep ranges and the different stuff every single rep range does. Let's go with rep ranges, and maybe later we'll talk about when you're going to hell. That's right, because you watch this channel, you're probably going to hell. Check this out. There are a bunch of different reps we can do when we're in the gym to get a bunch of different kinds of results. What I have done in this video is I've split up the reps into just a variety of ranges that don't overlap, and thus we can talk about each range specifically and see what each range is best suited for, what each range is okay for, and probably what each range is just not ideal for. We have 6 ranges. Here they are. Sets of 1 to 3 reps, sets of 3 to 6 reps. I just said it wasn't overlapping. I lied. Barely overlapping. Sets of 5 to 10 reps, sets of 10 to 20 reps, sets of 20 to 30 reps, and then sets of 30 reps plus. Now, the big caveat here, to get the most out of this discussion, just have to remember 2 things, or 1 really, that this is talking about working sets that are hard sets, close to failure, which means for sets of under 10 reps, we're talking about an RPEs, rating of perceived exertion, of 7 or above. And for sets of usually 5 reps and above, especially 10 reps and above, RIRs, reps in reserve, how many reps you have until you go to failure, of at most 3. So 3, 2, 1, or 0, right? So these are all hard sets. If we're doing them, we manage the load. The heavier loads get us into the lower rep ranges. The lighter loads get us into the higher rep ranges. Let's figure out what all these rep ranges are more ideally suited to, decent at, and then maybe not so great at. You guys can use this information to build your own training programs, modify your programs, so that you know what you want out of a program. You can arrange the training rep ranges in such a way that you get more of what you want and less of what you don't want. So here's the deal. Sets of 1 to 3 repetitions. They are great to develop specific peaking strength to show off your maximum force production, your 1 RM. Training with heavy sets of 1 to 3 is the best thing for, in the short term, really developing your 1 repetition max to show it off. It's not to say we build strength really well with these, which we do, and we'll get to that in a sec, but it's really sort of the last maybe 4 to 8 weeks of a program. If you do a lot of singles, doubles, and triples, you really get good at showing off your 1 rep max or going super, super heavy, right? Because there's a specificity there, when you have ultra heavy loads, it's a very specific condition, and sets of 1 to 3 reps let you practice in that specific condition. For example, if you walk out a set of 6 on the squat, that's heavy, a hard set of 6, RP 9 or something, that's heavy as shit. But even with the setup, you can set up 90% well, not really retracting your shit, not really pushing your elbows down, and you can still sort of hack it out, grind it out, because it's not that heavy. Sets of 1 to 3 heavy, your setup has to be almost ideal. Otherwise, if you try to lift it out of the rack, you're something's wrong, right? So it teaches you, and your walk back, with sets of 6, you can take 2 steps back and then adjust your feet and you're okay. With sets of 1 to 3, you might only have 2 total steps until you start pissing your pants. So you might want to really practice your walkout. Okay, I'm going to put my foot back. Okay, just here, and then put my foot back there. Okay, I know I'm going. My knees are out. I'm staring up. You also learn not to waste a lot of time under the bar, because as soon as that heavy load is on you, it changes things. Because the load is so much greater than your body weight if you're really strong, or just a higher percent of your body weight, no matter how strong you are, your center of gravity is a little bit different with a 1 to 3 RM load than it is with a 6 RM load or something like that. So it changes things. There's no shortage of benefit for practicing that, and there's no way you can get that maximum performance at ultra heavy weights without having really, really experienced it. Just you can train at a variety of martial arts and do a lot of jiu-jitsu and boxing drills and stuff like that. But if you're training for an MMA fight, at some point in training, you have to be hit in the face with a person who wants to hurt you, because if your first exposure is in that ring, holy shit, all your plans are going to be oh my God, what's going on? But if you've been there before, you can really develop at least a psychological utility to be like, okay, I know where I am. I'm not going to freak out. So really, really big thing here. It's such a big benefit that it's nearly mandatory for any kind of like really decent attempt at doing well in powerlifting and weightlifting. Like if you're a weightlifter or powerlifter and you want to do a competition to really show off how strong you really are, if you never do singles, doubles, and triples, sets of 1 to 3, you're not really doing your best to show off, right? It would be a really bad deal. Now, that's what they're ideal for. Sets of 1 to 3 are okay for general strength gains. So you can do them kind of all the time. You can. And they make you generally stronger, like your strength builds over time. However, it doesn't maximize your strength for one simple reason. It's such low repetitions per set that the stimulus to the muscle is relatively low, that get stronger signal isn't that high because you're just not under the bar for very long. The force transduction is amazing, but it like turns on for a bit and then turns off. And your muscles are like, yeah, I guess we got kind of a message to get stronger, but it wasn't that big of a message. And you can say, well, why don't we just do more of those sets, like 10 sets of 2 or something? You can, but while the stimulus is decent but not amazing for strength enhancement, the fatigue is really high because crushingly heavy loads, especially the psychology needed to get under them, like you got to rev up a little bit to do heavy doubles. That makes the fatigue really high. So if you take, one set causes this much fatigue, if you start layering on 4, 5, 6 sets, the needed volume to maximize strength adaptations, your fatigue is going to be crazy, crazy high, and thus not the optimal way to do things. So if you want the best basic strength, which we'll get to in just a bit, maybe sets of like 3 to 6 are a little bit better than 1 to 3 because of the really high fatigue component per volume of the sets of 1 to 3. So it's a fine way to get stronger, but it's almost like if you're really hungry, it's like eating like breakfast cereal with like this teeny tiny little spoon where you got one Cheerio on the spoon at a time. Like at some point you're like, can I just fucking get a bigger spoon because I'm really hungry? I don't want a lot of Cheerios. Same idea with doing singles and doubles and triples for enough volume for strength training. It's like, can't I just do a set of 6 here and it's still really heavy and it'll be good for me? And that's absolutely correct. Now, sets of 1 to 3 are great for peaking. They're decent for general strength. They're not ideal for hypertrophy because that whole volume stimulus to fatigue ratio problem multiplies manyfold. If you had to get your hypertrophy volume from sets of 1 to 3, holy shit, you might do like 8, I don't even know, man. You might realistically do like 15 to 20 sets of heavy doubles to get enough volume to get your quads to grow as well as they would from like 6 to 8 sets of 10-ish reps, right? Have you ever done a workout of 20 doubles, like actual heavy, hard trying doubles? That's nuts. Your fatigue, I don't know if a lot of people can finish a workout like that at actual heavy loads. At some point, it's just junk volume. And even if it's not junk volume, that fatigue contribution is fucking insane. You may never walk out of that gym. And if you do, you may not come back for 2 weeks at any decent performance. So it's just untenable for hypertrophy at its best. Now, will you still grow some muscle? Totally. Some muscle, decent muscle, and maximum muscle are 3 very different things. Decent muscle, fine, but it doesn't even do that. It grows muscle, and that's probably not what you want. So if you want to be your most jacked now, sets of 1 to 3 are probably not your best bet because those stimulus to fatigue ratios are terrible. And here's another one. Stimulus to time ratio is terrible. And if you're curious about these terms, the hypertrophy book that I co-authored is a great resource. Stimulus to time ratio is basically like how good of a workout can you get in how short of a time. Can you imagine how long a workout takes where you properly do 20 sets of doubles in the squat, for example? Properly means you got to rest 2 or 3 minutes between each set. And doubles wear you out. I mean, oh my God. You're in there and you're like, finally, I got all my work in. And someone's like, dude, it's been 3.5 hours. What'd you do? Like all hamstrings, quads, calves, adductors? You're like, yeah, just quads. And they're like, oh my God, like, are you nuts? This is the least efficient way to train and it's not very effective. And you're like, true, but I get to train heavy, which is sweet because I get to feel like I'm a T-Rex or whatever. Who knows, right? Not a great idea. Sets of 1 to 3 reps are really, really awesome at peaking your strength. Not so great at everything else. Moving along. We take weight off the bar. Things become lighter. Now we can do hard sets of 3 to 6 repetitions. All right, there's some overlap there, no big deal. Best use of 3 to 6 reps is developing what's called basic strength, the underlying ability of the muscle to produce force. If we want to show off that ability a ton, we have to put the icing on the cake and do sets of 1 to 3 for at least a few weeks. But to get that cake bigger, to get that ability to lift heavyweight higher, we need some combination of decent volume and decent load. And sets of 3 to 6 reps get all of that for us, which is really awesome. They let you train heavy, but with enough volume to drive maximum adaptations, and the fatigue isn't crazy excessive. It's an awesome balance, thus it drives strength the most. Now, it's okay for peaking strength. So if you want to do a powerlifting meet, but you don't want to peak for it, but you still want to kind of show off a little bit, it's totally fine. If you do heavy triples and heavy sets of 4 and 5, you're not going to be like a complete alien on a powerlifting platform or weightlifting platform. You'll do okay. Not your best if you had done singles and doubles, but you'll do just fine. It's not heavy enough to really get you clued into that ultimate heavy loads that you're going to be lifting in competition. Now, sets of 3 to 6 reps are also much better for hypertrophy than sets of 1 to 3. So they're actually okay for hypertrophy. You'll build lots of muscle size this way, especially if you're a beginner, you're not a hard gainer, so on and so forth. But remember, hypertrophy, one of the biggest drivers is training volume, and getting enough volume with sets of 3 to 6, because the stimulus to fatigue ratio isn't that great, it's better than sets of 1 to 3, but not amazing, you end up having the situation where if you want to get to the requisite volumes with sets of 3 to 6, you're just going to be much more beat up on the tail end. There's a great study from maybe 5 years ago by Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, where they compared like 3 sets of 10 with, I think, 7 sets of 3. And they showed that both people got the same amount of hypertrophy. Notice, same amount of hypertrophy, but they had to do 7 sets of 3 to match 3 sets of 10. And then when they interviewed both groups at various times, the 3x10 group and the 7x3 group, they all pretty much said the same thing, which was like the 3x10 group was usually like, yeah, this is easy. I could like do, you guys want me to do more sets? And they're like, no, stop. It's just 3. And they're like, all right, I feel fine. They were recovering super fast. And then the 7x3 group, the heavy training group, who tried to do hypertrophy training in the 3 to 6 range, they were like, please, for the love of God, get me out of here. I can't do this anymore. I'm so messed up, so tired. My joints are messed up. Everything's dying. I can't do this anymore. So they were ultra fatigued, not the best, most sustainable way to do it, right? Now, that's what the sets of 3 to 6 are okay for hypertrophy and okay for strength, right? Or sorry, okay for peaking strength and okay for hypertrophy. What are they not great for? Well, if you want to maximize either peaking strength or hypertrophy, these are not ideal for, okay, sets of 3 to 6, because there's a difference just in your mind about maximization versus things that work, right? Sometimes you want sort of the very best and the very best effort, and just things that work aren't good enough anymore. Like if you're training Usain Bolt to win the Olympics in sprinting, you're not going to be like, yeah, like do some kind of sprint program, it'll be fine. You have great genetics. Like great genetics will take him to the Olympics, but he has to have a real good program to win the Olympics. So if you're his coach, you're probably like, maybe like just a program's not good enough. We want the best. So if you want the best possible strength outcomes for peaking strength, you have to win this next powerlifting meet or do your best, or you have to, for example, be the best bodybuilder you can be and just really get as much muscle growth as possible. You're probably not going to want to stick to 3 to 6 reps all the time because it's never going to give you the best of both worlds. This is the case especially with advanced lifters. Beginners can get excellent peaking strength abilities and excellent hypertrophy from sets of 3 to 6 because beginners are easy. They adapt really fast and they adapt very generally. When you get more advanced, that stuff doesn't work as well anymore. You have to get more specific for what you want. This is why something like starting strength, 5x5, like do your 5s, or I don't know, I can't do that impression that well. Texas, man. So this is why 5x5 and stuff like that, 3x5 is really great for beginners, just to make them better at, well, everything, really. It's not the most ideal thing for folks that are more advanced. At that point, we have to bifurcate in a variety of other ways. And one of those ways is perhaps by doing sets of 5 to 10 repetitions. So that's our next repetition range. Its best uses is that it develops hypertrophy really well. General muscle growth, great. Like if you're saying you want to grow muscle and you show me your program and you're doing sets of 5 to 10, I'm never going to be like, that's stupid. Like, that's awesome. Right on. And it's especially the case with large amplitude movements that take a lot of time to execute, like a squat versus like a calf raise in which one rep happens in like a fraction of a second, right? And there's not enough time spent stimulating tension. If you guys are interested in that topic, we have an older video, one of our really good ones, of when I address time under tension. So just type in Israel time under tension and you'll get a great video describing the amplitude stuff going on. Basically, large amplitude movements in which the bar takes a long time to move. Sets of 5 to 10 reps are great and nearly ideal for hypertrophy and probably for faster twitch fibers. Now, the current state of the literature as I record this it's not very convincing that fiber type hypertrophy is a thing. There are some hints that maybe it's a thing, especially in extreme cases, especially for advanced individuals. So it's not very clear that super heavy lifting for sure prioritizes the faster twitch fibers, and the super light lifting for sure prioritizes the slower twitch fibers. It could be a little bit more complex than that and maybe just not clear. We're going to operate under that general assumption for the rest of this lecture. But in your mind, I would heavily caveat it as being like, this rep range stuff for fiber types specifically might not pan out all that great. So keep a skeptical eye, of course, everything I say and everything anyone else says, but especially to this right now. So it has been reported that, like, faster twitch individuals, former sprinters, things like that, really explosive people, they get a lot of hypertrophy benefit. And that's occurred in my coaching of many people as well. I've coached tons of athletes before. They generally, explosive, fast twitch dominant athletes really respond well to hypertrophy in the 5 to 10 rep range. If you start pushing sets of 15 and 20 on them, a lot of times that kind of jack shit happens. They just kind of get tired. So at least from my personal experience, whatever dog shit that's worth, maybe give that some thought, right? Sets of 5 to 10 reps are great for general hypertrophy, especially potentially faster twitch muscle fibers, and they're also really awesome for letting you develop your technique. Why? Sets of 5 to 10 reps aren't so heavy that they crush you and you can't do the technique. Like, you don't teach someone how to squat with singles, the heavy singles, because they just have one rep to practice and then they fuck it up. Like, well, sorry, you're done. And they will fuck it up because it's so heavy. They like freak out, right? So sets of 5 to 10, not so heavy that people freak out. They can maintain good technique. And at the same time, it's not enough reps to degrade technique. Because if you try to teach technique with sets of like 20, then by set number or by rep number 12 or 15, the people are just trying to get through it and their technique goes to hell because the burn is happening. They get tired, they get bored. Sets of 5 to 10 are that awesome kind of middle range where it's just enough repetition practice to get them a really good training. And it's not so much repetition, and it's just enough load to get them to feel the load, but not so much load that it crushes their technique, and it doesn't tire them out, so it doesn't degrade their technique. So a lot of times when you teach technique to beginners, it'll be in sets of 5 to 10, which is really, really awesome. Now, what is it okay for? Training sets of 5 to 10. It's ideal for basically general hypertrophy, especially faster twitch. It's ideal for teaching technique. It's okay for basic strength. Like if you train sets of 5 to 10, especially sets of 5, 6, and 7, you will get stronger. Unless you're already an advanced powerlifter, that might not happen. But for almost all the rest of us, bodybuilders included, sets of 5 to 10 generally increase your strength considerably. For example, if you were benching 200 pounds for sets of 8, and then months later you're benching 230 pounds for sets of 8, and someone asks you like, hey, do you think your 1 rep max improved? Yeah, it fucking improved, right? Or if it didn't improve right away, just a couple of weeks of training with lower reps will get your max will shoot up because underlying wise, you built a ton of muscle and a ton of actually neurological strength as well. Not ideal if you want to be the strongest person ever. There's times for sets of 5 to 10 for hypertrophy, but when you want to get basic stronger, sets of 3 to 6 are king. However, if you train in that 5 to 10 rep range, it's not all lost and you will continue to make probably some strength improvements or at least not lose a whole lot of strength. What are sets of 5 to 10 not ideal for remotely? Peaking strength. I mean, for the love of God. If you like load your perceived 1 rep max at a competition, someone's like, what'd you hit in your last week of peak training? You're like, I don't know, like 90 pounds less than this for a set of 6. They're like, what the hell is wrong with you? You're like, yeah, I'm an idiot, right? You go under there, technique changes, you get folded over. Who the fuck knows? Great way to get injured too. Secondly, if you're trying to get hypertrophy, but you're doing especially isolation movements that have a low amplitude, for the isolation movement, sometimes it's just injurious and kind of a little bit risky. Like if you're doing sets of 5 to 10 in lateral raises, for some people, their shoulders just don't handle that shit at all because it's just one isolation movement. Sets of like 6 in the tricep push down, that's kind of a little weird. Some people will report elbow issues that aren't ideal from that. Whereas if you do like sets of 6 on a close grip bench, it's compound, the weight can shift from various joint to joint and it's not a problem. And a lot of times low amplitude moves. So one of the factors of hypertrophy is volume, and volume isn't, yes, it's measured as sets times reps times weight times distance, but that distance is a big difference between squats, for how much distance your quads have to move the weight over, versus calf raises in which each one's like, So if you guys ever tried doing calf raises for like sets of like 8, the set is over in like 10 seconds. You don't have a pump. You don't have any hardly tension perception. You don't have any kind of fatigue. You're like, that was kind of like, it felt like a set of 1 to 3 that I would do for my quads. And hilariously, it takes like roughly the same amount of time. So the amount of time your muscles are actually producing tension in calf raises for sets of 8 is about the same time as they would in a squat for like a double, right? And then at that point, it's like, well, doubles aren't ideal for hypertrophy. Why the hell would sets of 8 for calves be? And the reality is usually they're not, right? Forearm curls, a little humor there for you. Insert your favorite masturbation joke. Shrugs. Okay, really low amplitude movement. Like, how long does it take you to do 10 shrugs? Like 5 seconds or something? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. You're done. And even if it's really good technique and paused and stuff, it just doesn't take long. And then, of course, calf raises are the other big one. For those, higher rep ranges are probably more ideal for hypertrophy, in most cases, especially for advanced individuals. Otherwise, you have to do a shitload of sets for them, which is annoying in its own right? Lastly, folks for whom joints are a limiting factor in the real world may bias a little bit away from sets of 5 to 10 in their hypertrophy pursuit. This includes ultra-strong bodybuilders many times. So for example, you'll see a bodybuilder squatting and they'll do sets of 10 to 12 and it'll be like after leg press or hack squat. And you'll be like, dude, why don't you do like sets of 5 in the squat? Like, yeah, that would mean I have to squat like 730 for 5 with a lot of pro bodybuilders. That's how strong they are. Like last time I did that, like almost herniated a disc and I pulled my quad. And for me, like I'm so big and strong that low reps just don't have a good trade-off anymore. The risk is too high. My joints are too fucked up. I'm training for 20 years that just joints don't take it like they used to. And also I'm too strong, etc. And that's really a thing. So sometimes you'll see like wire bodybuilders, and people always say like, starting strength that got me really jacked when I was younger to an intermediate level, sets of 5. And that was great. Why all the pro bodybuilders training? Because, you guys have seen all the videos. A lot of those guys train with like 15, 20, 25 reps per set. And you're like, why? Well, one of the reasons is that like, they would love to go heavier. It's just not tenable for them anymore. The risk and reward just isn't there. So there's something for you guys to consider as well. All right. Next up, sets of 10 to 20 reps. In my view, on average, huge blanket statement, which doesn't apply to a bunch of people because there's tons of exceptions. It's probably the best hypertrophy range, right? It accommodates nearly all movement types, isolations, compounds, machines, barbells, low amplitude, high amplitude, etc. It stimulates all of the pathways of hypertrophy really well. Metabolites, the pump, tension, even if damage is one of them, it does that shit too. It hits all the boxes really well for almost every muscle. For hypertrophy, it's almost never the wrong answer. And it's a big range. 10 to 20 is a big range. So for your heavier-ish preferring muscles, sets of 10 to 12. For your lighter-ish preferring muscles, sets of 18 to 20 or something like that. And then everything else in between is a really good general solution for that problem. And it's really good, especially for high volume hypertrophy training, because the stimulus to fatigue ratios are really awesome. Sets of 10 to 20 are just heavy enough to really get you to grow and put some great tension through, but not so heavy that it really starts to impinge on your joints a whole lot. So on average, the stimulus to fatigue ratio is really good. On average, there's tons of exceptions, but it's almost never like the wrongest answer in the world. Now, if there's a chance that there's hypertrophy training of various loads and rep ranges targets different fiber types, or perhaps different pathways like the metabolite pathway and the pump pathway and the tension pathway. And then if you just do sets of 10 to 20 all the time, it's okay for targeting perhaps the faster twitch fibers and the tension mediated pathways. And it's okay for targeting the slower twitch fibers and perhaps the metabolite pathways and stuff, but it's not like the thing that does either one of those best. Like if you really need high tension, you do sets of 5 to 10. If you really want to drive a crazy amount of metabolites, you do sets of 20 to 30. 10 to 20 is a great middle ground, but that means it just does both of them okay. The thing is, you probably grow a lot from both. And if you have something that does both okay, it does the best general job. Plain and simple, right? Like if you love pizza and hate birthday cake, just go to a pizza place. If you just hate pizza and love birthday cake, go to one of those cake places. But if you like pizza and birthday cake about the same, you usually like to eat pizza and then birthday cake, go to a random person's birthday party. Usually wearing a trench coat's a good idea. Cover your sunglasses, fake mustache hat generally tends to work well. My parole officer says these jokes are not funny. Stop making them. But who cares what he says? In any case, like, look, if you want sort of the best of both worlds, if you want to get the best meal ever, like on average, and not everyone likes dessert, not everyone likes the main course, but generally you want both, right? And both together make the meal awesome. So there are times and places where you do want to do sets of 5 to 10, and really 10 to 20 is not the greatest answer. Sometimes there are places where you want to do sets of 20 to 30, and we'll get to that in just a bit. But on average, 10 to 20 is just tough to argue against as a kind of baseline way to approach training, especially when you're intermediate and advanced. Now, what is it not great for? Tons of stuff. Strength development. Okay, people ask me on Instagram all the time. They're like, see you doing sets of 15. Like, does that make you a lot stronger? I'm like, not really. I mean, like, it makes my muscles bigger. And if I wanted to train my nervous system and technique, make those muscles stronger, I could, but then I would have to do other reps. So it's not the best thing for making you stronger. Sure as hell don't see powerlifters doing this hardly ever, and it's not by accident. Folks that have underdeveloped technique shouldn't be doing lots of sets of 10 to 20 reps because it's so fatiguing and so high duration, their technique starts to break down. Okay, when you do a set of 15, you just think like, I just got to get through this shit. Like if you do a set of 5 to 10, you're like, all right, I can focus on technique because the shit is going to be over pretty soon, right? So a lot of times people have problems with technique. And if they come see me, what I do is I say, okay, there's enough of this regular training. Let's just go back to sets of 5 to 10 and we can go pretty heavy, but I want every rep to be good technique. It's just not realistic to expect that from 10 to 20 reps. It is when they have already mastered the technique. It's totally fine to keep going. But when you're trying to relearn and really ingrain new good technique, it's tough to do in sets of 10 to 20. It's kind of like you either teach or you really train in sets of 10 to 20. It's difficult to do both at the same time. Another thing is some folks seem to have problems going into low reps in reserve. So approaching failure. Some folks, they have this thing, and it's totally fine. There's a lot of people have this where they're like, I don't know if I'm like 5 reps in reserve or 1. I can seem to always grind out more reps. For folks like that, sets of 5 to 10 are really good because look, at some point the weight's just too fucking heavy. Like if you see someone that you put their real 5 to 10 RM on the bar and they're like, I can just keep going. You're like, wait, here's your 6 RM. Keep going with that. And if they do like 15 reps, so clearly that wasn't their 6 RM. But even then, if they do 15 reps, you're like, well, that's your 15 RM, but at least you actually failed and went to failure. Whereas if you put someone's what you think their 10 to 20 RM is, and they're a grinder, they can just kind of keep going. You're like, fuck, we're like 23 reps. Like, what is even going on here? And a lot of times their technique is dog shit by then. So if you really need to teach folks how to go to failure, sets of 5 to 10 are probably better, right? And a lot of times slower twitch folks just keep grinding and grinding and grinding. You're like, this is definitely a mismatch. So that's something to consider. Basically big limitations. Now, second to last, sets of 20 to 30 repetitions. What are they good for? Well, hypertrophy training with isolations and machines where you can lock in your technique. There's not a lot of it to require and just grind, like chest press or tricep extension machine or something, sets of 25 reps. A lot of low amplitude movements, really great for those high reps because you can get all the work in that you need, and usually they're not very technique heavy. Potentially develop hypertrophy of the slower twitch fibers and potentially go through those metabolite and pump pathways. Continue developing hypertrophy while providing low joint stress. So for example, if your elbows have just had it with heavy training, you can probably still get really awesome, really good stimulative training by doing sets of 20 to 30 reps. And it really takes so much pressure off your joints. Yeah, you kind of feel like a little bitch lifting super light, but the burn is crazy. You're getting great responses and you can back away from your joints. Maybe for a couple of months, you come back to heavy and your joints have healed. So it's really awesome because a lot of people tend to think like, man, I can't train triceps anymore because my elbows are beating me up. And you're like, what is your idea of training triceps? Like heavy sets 8, skull crushers, behind the neck extension. You're like, all right, try sets of 25-ish of, push downs or something, and you do it and they're like, do your elbows hurt? And they're like, no, it feels great, but I feel like a little bitch for lifting this little weight. Like, well, cool news. You still get a great hypertrophy response to do this for a few weeks, a few months, and then your elbows will feel 100% fine. You can start going back into the heavier stuff if that's your preference. That point is extra exclamation mark when you're coming back from injury. Let's say you tore your quad. Maybe it wasn't even a big tear, just a little one. After 4 weeks, your doctor clears you to go start lifting again. Start at 20 to 30 reps. Do not start at 5 to 10. You will just re-tear the thing with a high probability. Start at 20 to 30 reps because the forces are so low. The growth comes not a ton from tension as much, but more from the metabolites and the pump effect. You can maximize those growth pathways for a short time, several weeks or several months. Then when you're feeling super good, you don't feel that injury site at all, slowly increase the weight to get it back into the 10 to 20 range. And then if it feels great there for a few weeks, few months, you can go back into the 5 to 10 range and then train through a broad spectrum of ranges. So when you come back from injury, sets of 20, 30 are awesome because here's twofold. Chances of you injuring are the lowest they can possibly be. And possibly be while training hard, and you're still training hard and getting a great adaptation. Because it's easy to have this sort of like bimodal view of training as it's either rehab or I'm fucking fighting Godzilla. It can be graded to where you do rehab, you finish your rehab, you start doing sets of 20 to 30, not so heavy, then sets of 20 or not so close to failure, then sets of 20, 30 closer to failure, then sets of 20 to 30 often to failure, and then sets of 15 to 20, 10 to 15, so on and so forth until you get to Godzilla. And then you're ready to punch that motherfucker in the mouth. Bam! You ever thought about if you were scaled up to Godzilla's size, but you retained your, you weren't punching like a big guy. You could still, you know what I'm saying, bob and weave. How would you do against Godzilla? Unfair because of two things. First of all, he has a shitload of spikes everywhere, which blows. Like, where the fuck do you hit that guy? And also, he has like a atomic breath or whatever. It's difficult to figure out exact nature, but I don't want any atoms breathing on me. Fuck that. A nuclear reactor stay encased. So maybe not Godzilla, but like King Kong. Right? Because he's an ape, but he doesn't exactly move as athletically as like a real ape because they scaled him up. He's kind of slow. I don't know, man. I don't know. Plus, he's got a lot of jiu-jitsu liabilities there. You can wrist lock the fuck out of Kong. Give that some stuff in your free time when you have no friends like me. In any case, sets of 20 to 30 reps. Great for all that stuff. What are they okay for? Well, targeting a broad range of fibers. And here's one of the myths that died about 5 years ago is that high reps don't target the faster twitch muscle fibers. They sure as fuck do, because those fibers are, first of all, recruited right away when you start lifting, just not completely. They still get tension. And secondly, especially through the middle of the set, as you start to fatigue, they start getting recruited more and more and more. Now, later they get not recruited as much because you get fatigued and there's a ton of metabolites in the area preventing that recruitment. But generally speaking, per hard set of 20 to 30, you still get tons of faster fiber stimulus. So no problems there. Still decent broad range, and of course, great slower fiber stimulus. And they're okay for providing sort of medium-term growth for months. They're actually pretty good at it. But that's what takes us to the downsides. And I'll just skip to the third one and come back up because this relates to the first point. It's not clear from the literature, and a lot of bodybuilders have voiced their opinions on this, a lot of coaches, that only training in the 20 to 30 rep range, for example, like your quads, all you can do is sets of 20, 30 reps. You can't train any heavier than that. It's not clear that provides the most robust long-term growth. Yeah, for several months, that probably provides pretty good growth because the metabolite pathway is pretty powerful. So is the pump pathway. The thing is, your body gets really good at buffering metabolites and not getting as good of a pump for the amount of volume you're doing pretty fast. And it's been shown in a few studies within a few weeks, few months, you have to do way more volume to get the same effect, and thus your stimulus to fatigue ratio starts to really go to hell. Like, you guys know, like, the first time you do a set of like 25 close to failure, you get this fucking crazy gnarly, probably, oh my fuck, and you get sore like crazy. A few weeks later, you do like multiple sets of 25, and you're like, I don't know, I just feel kind of tired. That adaptation doesn't really happen with lower rep training. Lower rep training is effective now, effective tomorrow, effective next year. With high rep training, it might need to be done in phases where you do a bunch of it for a while and you do a little bit less, or you do a bunch of it for a while and you do a little less. You have to let it reset. Maybe, this isn't for sure, maybe it is a great form of long-term growth, but there's enough skepticism there for me to cut you guys the real deal and just let you sort of watch out for that. What I don't want you guys to do is you're going out sets 20, 30 reps, great for the joints, still provides robust hypertrophy. I'll just do it all the time. And Dr. Mike said, and then like 3 years later, you didn't grow nearly as much as you wanted because you didn't go super heavy or like much heavier, sets of 10 to 20, sets of 5 to 10. And then you experiment, you're like, fuck Dr. Mike, he's an idiot. You start doing sets of 10 to 20, 5 to 10, and you fucking just get this revolution of growth. And you're like, that fucking asshole it screwed me out of 3 years of optimal growth. Just have that on the horizon, right? And then, of course, there are the obvious things that this rep range is not very great for. Strength development, for the love of God, sets of 20 or 30. Fuck, you're talking about strength. You're not going to get much stronger doing that unless you're a super, super, super raw beginner. Faster fiber focus, if fibers can be focused on with higher or lower weights, we're not really sure, but it's a potential, then, sets of 20 to 30 are not the way to get your faster fibers to grow. One example is like hamstring training. A lot of times people really respond to much heavier weights with hamstring training, maybe because the hamstrings are faster fiber so something like that might be in play. Folks that have underdeveloped technique, for the love of God, you do not teach technique with sets of 20 to 30 because it's just survival. Like, you have to have good technique to try sets like that because you got to lock in the technique and go. As a matter of fact, usually machines and isolations are best. Even if the best squat technique or deadlift technique in the world, anything north of for sure 20 reps, your technique is breaking down almost 100%, or it's going to take you so much effort to just keep the technique going that your target muscles aren't even being stimulated anymore because your technique supporting muscles like your spinal erectors and the deadlift, they're doing all the fucking work at that point. Your glutes are like, man, I don't know. And your traps are like, the load's not heavy enough. And you're just trying to be technical while you're breathing super heavy. And also folks that can't seem to get to low reps in reserve, that can't get close to failure. Sets of 20 to 30, you're setting them up, plan sets of 20 to 30, turn into sets of like 45. And they're like, I can still go. And you're like, put the fucking weight down. Fuck this. Here's your set of 5 to 10, heavier, go do this. And then they actually hit failure. They actually figure out what that's like. And then they go from there. So definitely some limitations there, right? What about sets of 30 reps plus? Now, there's nuance here, right? Sets of 31 still grow you really well, almost as good as sets of 30. Maybe even sets of 35. Maybe sets of 40 do a good job. But 40, 50, 60, we're getting into this realm where some growth is offered, especially if you're beginner or intermediate, but it's nowhere near our best effort. And it's also so light, it begs the question of like, why not get much more guaranteed growth by going back into the 20 to 30 range? And if you're so injured that 20 to 30 is impossible for you, maybe recovery is a bigger emphasis for you than hypertrophy or something like that. Also, getting truly to failure or close to failure sets of 50 is like basically impossible because the pain is going to stop you way before the muscle stops contracting. So their use in the gym is just downright questionable. Like, if I see someone doing like a straight, not like my reps where you pause a little bit, a straight set, you imagine someone doing a curling with the bar and they're doing this. And you're like, all right, yeah, they're warming up. And they're like at 15. And you're like, damn, this is a long warm up. And then they're like at 25. And you're like, what's up? Metabolite, I love it. And then they're like at 36. And you're like, he's still going. And then they're like at 81. And they're still doing this. And you're like, I think you've misconstrued what the gym is for. The reason that the weights go on the bar is because it makes the bar heavier. The heaviness that helps you to have all this. It's not the fact that you can do it 150 times and they're at like 1,651. And you're like, sir, what are you doing? Like, get out of my face. I'm going for the all-time easy bar unloaded curl record. And I'm sorry, Jesus, there's a camera there. I noticed. Oops. So honestly, going that light is at best questionable and at worst a gigantic fucking waste of time. These rep ranges 30 plus, especially the plus, don't reliably build size or strength. Well, for sure, strength. If you want to develop local muscular endurance for sport, it is best done in a sport-specific fashion. So if you need endurance to take shots in wrestling or to do arm drags in jiu-jitsu or something, repeat arm drag game, then you should probably go into a wrestling room or jiu-jitsu dojo or whatever. Fuck dojo. I've been training jiu-jitsu for how many years? I fucking call it dojo. Gym also. And it's cooler. I wish it was called dojo. And you just do sport-specific drills with a training partner, right? You shoot and come up, shoot, come up, shoot, come up. You start to run out of air. It's okay. Your muscles are starting to fry up. Keep shooting because it gives you the technique practice and the muscular endurance. It's not some shit you really do in a gym. Like, there's two ways to get better quad endurance for shooting and reshooting on an opponent. One way is to do the actual shooting, reshooting in a gym, on a wrestling mat and actually learn the technique and do your timing. And the other way is to do like high rep leg extensions at a fitness club where like an old lady is like either scrolling on her cell phone or is dead and her fingers just moving like that for no reason. One of those makes you much better at wrestling than the other. So best sport specific. And of course, systemic endurance, which people say like, man, if I squat for 50 reps, it just makes me better at like everything endurance because it fucks my lungs and heart up so much. That's totally true. But ostensibly, you have a sport in which you're trying to show off. You're not just trying to become the most endurant lifter of all time. That is better done through sports. If you want great systemic endurance, fucking go for a jog or do whatever sport. Like, I do jiu-jitsu competitively, and if I want sport-specific jiu-jitsu endurance to go up, guess what I do? I do jiu-jitsu or repeat drilling or something like that. Start on bottom, get out. Start on bottom, get out. Start on bottom, get out. And if you have training partners, they can 3-on-1 you, right? So there's just one of you and 3 of them. You beat the one guy and you get out, and the next guy comes in fresh. You beat him, the next guy fresh. And while those guys are waiting, they're resting and you never get a chance to rest. That gives you both great jiu-jitsu or whatever sport you do acumen, and it builds that endurance way better than doing it in the gym. So if you see someone doing sets of 80 or whatever in the gym and they're not doing rehab or some other weird shit, probably not their best use of gym time. Folks, damn, I said a lot of shit. Think about if you would beat Godzilla. Maybe you get like a helmet and a hazmat suit for his atomic breath, but still finger dexterity so you can, grab and wrist lock and stuff. And think of how you would do against King Kong. He probably bites. Fuck. See you guys next time.